Well, if this happens to be the first clip in the Apollo Defectives Rank Amateurs on Patrol Part 2, welcome to Part 2. Just a little bit more on Bart Sabrell.
Some, bad line or whatever. Here's the fact. The more fanatical someone becomes, the more they prove that they're wrong.
The more fanatical someone becomes, the more they prove they're wrong. So he's right about something else. The more fanatical someone becomes, the more they prove they're wrong. Well, I've never seen a bigger bunch of fanatics than this bloke. This bloke here, who's not looking too good. He's still looking a little peaky, a bit seedy. Ben. Actually, none of them are looking at all perky in this video. Marcus Allen looks like he's barely alive, and he's looking a little bit like Keith Richards' grandfather. And we've got Captain Souffle here, looking decidedly down. But the more fanatical someone becomes, the more they prove they're wrong. Couldn't agree more, Mr. Sabrell. Well done. I suppose you had to get something right eventually. Okay, let's just see if there's something else here we can comment on.
And we who are on the side of saying, hey, people, wake up. The government lied. What a surprise.
This is his opinion, of course. It was their opinion. There's no evidence whatsoever for any of this. I think these people are doing an awful lot of people a serious disservice by spreading this nonsense.
They didn't go to the moon. None of us has ever called someone a jerk, cursed at them, or whatever because...
Yeah, I suspect it's coming. But sorry, Mr. Sabrell, but you do inspire those sort of reactions in people because you're talking rubbish. It's just, the first thing that pops into my head when I hear something like that, something like the sort of rubbish that you and these other guys come out with, is these people are idiots, these people are cretins, these people are clueless. Sorry about that, I just can't help it. I just can't pretend to respect people with opinions like that. It's just so bloody ludicrous.
Because they think that we really went to the moon, but that's the venom we do receive. I receive email.
Yeah, that's the venom you deserve. I receive emails, yes, Mr. Sabrell,
for people saying they wish they could watch me, my family, my children burn alive before their eyes simply because I said the moon landings are fake.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think if I saw Mr. Sabrell and his wife and kids burning alive, I'd probably be tempted to try and extinguish the wife and kids with anything that might be lying around, anything that I might find, handy that I could use to beat out the flames on the wife and kids. I would use. I'd probably grab Mr. Sabrell by the ankles and beat out the flames on his wife and kids with his bloated carcass. What would I do really? If honestly, if I saw Bart Sabrell burning at the side of the road, I would get in the car. I would drive as fast as I could down to the nearest supermarket and get some marshmallows and hope that I could get back in time for there still to be enough heat coming off him to adequately toast them. Okay, I think I'll stop this one here and see what else we can find. Right, okay, I think this is worth a look. Not quite. I'll have to watch some of this guy's stuff. I've not seen this guy before. Looks like a refugee from the Beverly Hillbillies. But back to the point.
Yeah.
Nice car. Yeah. Well, it's not bad.
Nice car. Well, it's not bad, says Scott Henderson, giving the impression that that's his car. When in fact it's a futuristic calendar. Mr. Henderson probably drives a Reliant Robin.
Bugatti? That's a 2025 Bugatti Aerolith.
Yeah. When asked, yeah, if he hadn't asked, they would have been left with the impression that that was Scott Henderson's car. That's the sort of people these conspiracy theorists are. They love to give impressions, give distortions of the truth. I'll tell you blatant lies. This is the world of the conspiracy theorist.
Hasn't quite come out yet. Here's a nice shot of the.
See, Scott Henderson. I mean, if you listen to Scott Henderson, he's having trouble flapping his gums as well. He sounds half dead or half asleep or something.
Flag here.
Mind you, he has told this. This is a very old chestnut for Scott Henderson. The the wet flag on the moon. He's probably told this story so many times that even he is bored with it. The story is, of course, completely ridiculous. I did a video debunking this, and I might very well leave a link to that below. And what's more, when Ben Emlyn-Jones responded to my video debunking it, he agreed with me. Ben Emlyn-Jones said, yeah, Steve Mumbling's right, it's not a wet flag. So why isn't Ben Emlyn-Jones saying to Scott Henderson now, right now, no, Scott, that's not a wet flag, you're talking out of your backside? I reckon that's a pretty good question.
Pull it up to see how nice and soaking wet it is. Right? I'm sure keeping it wet on the moon stops it from degrading so much. You can see all the water there. You can see it drying into the edges back.
Yeah, and he's said this so many times, and it is absolute bloody rubbish. I'll show you why. If this was a wet flag, as Mr. Henderson claims, you see the stars here. These are material. He's just said they're stitched on stars. They're not. It's not printed. If this was a wet flag, it would be drying back from the thickest parts of the flag. So there's more material in the stars. There's more material on the seam here. So there'd be a dark band along. If this was a wet flag that was drying, there'd be a dark band along that seam there. And there would be a dark star shapes, maybe circles around the stars, because the stars would be thicker. They would contain more moisture. This wouldn't be a continuous band through the flag like that. This particular flag, this is the Apollo 17 flag. This flag was hanging up in mission control for the whole Apollo mission series. And for Apollo 17, they decided to take it off the wall, fly it to the moon, and leave it on the moon. And in the video that I did debunking this bloody rubbish, I actually showed the flag on the wall in mission control and above a double door, and you could see that the light was on it. So this is just faded with the way the light fell on it. These may even be reinforcing strips. This might be a sandwich layer, the blue part of the flag, and there might be just a strip through there just to stitch the stars onto. What it isn't is a wet flag, and I think that's very obvious. I was going to get one of these flags, so you can still buy them. A company called Ninan make them. Get it wet and just film it drying. But if I did that, what you would see is a dark band along the seams where the thickest parts of the material are. Where there's more material, it's going to take longer to dry. So there'll be a dark band along the seam. There'll be dark patches around the stars. There'll be nothing in the middle. This would not be a continuous band. So even more rubbish from Scott Henderson. Actually, I think I might just include the clip of Ben Emlyn-Jones agreeing with me and ask that question again. You're bound to be watching this video, Ben. Why did you not challenge Scott Henderson on the wet flag? If you agree with me that it's not a wet flag. Okay, let's see if I can find that clip. Okay, so here's Ben Emlyn-Jones, and This is his third reply to Steve mumbling, so this is a Ben Emlyn-Jones production. And Ben is just about to agree with me that Scott Henderson's claim about the wet flag is in fact wrong.
My breakfast. Now, there's this one, and there's the one with the flag in the lunar module, reflection in the lunar module window. I'll look at that one a bit later on. I came across this one first. Now, this is again Scott Henderson, and he's saying he's given the Apollo image library reference number there, AS17, so it's from Apollo 17. It's image 134-203-83. This flag has been exposed to water and is very wet indeed. Of course, Mr. Henderson knows that because he saw the flag being immersed in water and he actually felt it.
All right, Steve rambles on an awful lot, but the point he makes is that he doesn't think that flag was wet. What he thinks is just a lighting effect caused by folds in the material.
No, that's not actually what I said. If you watch the video, see, Ben does this often. He does these response videos, and he doesn't actually look and listen to what he's responding to. So he's a bit off the point here. The points that I made were pretty much like the points that I made in the previous clip about the way the flag would dry if it was wet, and the lighting effect was because it had been hanging in the mission control for years and had light shining on it from one end. It may very well produce that sort of banding type effect, and I think in the video that I showed debunking this, there was actually a new flag that had nothing whatsoever. It was an image of a flag that had nothing whatsoever to do with the Apollo missions. It was just a flag made by that particular company, and that had the banding in it. But regardless, Ben is agreeing with me.
We should make it look as if it's wet, and he gives several reasons why he doesn't think it's wet. And to be honest, he may be right. That might actually be the case.
Yeah, okay. Now he didn't say that to Scott Henderson in this video. This Apollo, whatever he called it, with the in the last clip where Scott Henderson is talking about the flag. Why didn't Ben Emlyn-Jones say no? Steve Mumbling might be right about this. It's not a wet flag.
So this might be an error on Scott's part. However, Steve doesn't address several other points relating to flags, and that flag generally.
No, I think I've addressed all the points with regard to the flags. I can't think of anything that I haven't addressed. I might even find the clip where Ben Emlyn-Jones is agreeing that the reflection of the flag in the lunar module window is actually, the flagpole is actually the graticle, because you can see the measurement lines in it. So he's been doing a pretty good job of debunking himself and his pal, says Mr. Jones. All right, well, I think that's good enough. I think you can plainly see there that Ben Emlyn-Jones is saying that I'm probably right. It's not a wet flag. Scott's made a mistake. May very well have made a mistake. But the question is, why didn't he challenge Scott? Why are these videos done by these guys just a ludicrous notion, backslapping fest where nothing is challenged? I think the question answers itself, don't you? Okay, what else we got? Now on to the really exciting stuff. It sounds as though they're having trouble staying awake, this bunch. Here's Jarrah White, who's going to tell us all about the lethal radiation.
Here we go. I did the calculations for the... can you hear me now? Testing.
You're okay now. You're breaking up a minute ago. Carry on.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine now.
Ben sounds as though he's losing the will to live. I think as are the rest of the panellists and anybody watching this, to be perfectly honest.
Okay. Well, basically what I managed to do was, I used the indicator to basically calculate the...
I missed what he said there. He used the something or another.
Doses. I'll get you... I managed to get all the the actual doses. This is the fluxes. You see, what you do is you know the coordinates for a given region of space, such as the trajectory that's been attributed to the Apollo missions.
Yeah, okay. Being another Colin, of course, you have to slow this guy down. You have to record this guy and slow him down by a factor of 2 so you can understand what he's saying. But he's saying that he's calculated the dose at the given points along the trajectory of the Apollo craft, so he would have had to have done that in 3 dimensions, of course. And so he would have had to have drawn mathematically, he would have had to have drawn the trajectory in 3 dimensions, and of course taken into account the speed of the spacecraft. Now, okay, let's continue. I don't see any of that, unless this is what this chart is. It's difficult to read, to be honest.
You plug that into the AX8, and this will give you a flux. Basically, how much particles at a given energy are basically interacting with this square centimetre of space. Okay, so here, for example, let me put the first one here. Here, for example, let's see, L equals 1.4.
You getting all this?
4, and the B of the B naught is 2. This is basically the first minute of transit to the belts. For 10 MeV, we see there's 2.87 by 10 to the 2. Right, that's how many protons there are at that energy at 10 megaelectron volts. Basically, you do the calculations. I'll show you the calculations that you do. Where is it?
I think he's using information from some of the information they're using is from 1953. I think Jarrah's using information from the 60s. I mean, I suppose it's probably appropriate, but I can't read that. It's too small to read, to be perfectly honest. Some links to this original information would be good.
Okay, sorry, I will delete it along. Here we go. This is the calculations that you... What's this? Okay, but basically this is the calculations that you do. You would basically take the protons per square centimetre per second, you would multiply that by the surface area of a human.
So you multiply that by the surface area of a human. Okay, so what he's doing is calculating the radiation dose applied to a naked astronaut without the protection of a spacesuit or a spacecraft travelling along the trajectory of the Apollo mission, the Apollo 11 mission, which is plotted in 3 dimensions, although I don't actually see that. So I don't know quite what the chances might be of a naked astronaut sort of space running alongside the spacecraft through the Van Allen radiation belts at 12,000 miles an hour. Probably not terribly high, I would suspect. But anyway, rather than drift into a coma, I think it's a lot easier just to have a look at a couple of other things here. First of all, let's take a look at what Van Allen actually said about his belts. So this is a guy that's actually emailed Professor Van Allen to ask him what it's all about. And here is Professor Van Allen's response to Mr. Lambert. I reply to your email. I send the following copy of a response that I wrote to another inquiry about 2 months ago. I think Bob Banning's posted a quote from Van Allen as well that says pretty much the same thing. The radiation belts of the Earth do indeed pose important constraints on the safety of human spaceflight. The very energetic tens to hundreds of MeV, mega electron volts, protons in the inner radiation belt are the most dangerous and most difficult to shield against. Specifically, prolonged flights, i.e. ones of many months duration, of humans or other animals in orbits about the Earth must be conducted at altitudes less than about 250 miles in order to avoid significant radiation exposure. Now, the conspiracy theorists, of course, love it up to this point. They might even love it for a little bit further. A person in the cabin of a space shuttle in a circular equatorial orbit in the most intense region of the inner radiation belt at an altitude of about 1,000 miles will be subjected to a fatal dosage of radiation in about 1 week. Now, the conspiracy people like Marcus Allen will love this right up to that point. Now we get to the important bit. However, the outbound and inbound trajectories of the Apollo spacecraft cut through the outer portions of the inner belt, and because of their high speed, spent only about 15 minutes in traversing the region and less than 2 hours in traversing the much less penetrating radiation in the outer radiation belt. The resulting radiation exposure for the round trip was less than 1% of a fatal dosage, a very minor risk among the far greater other risks of such flights. Reading this through the camera viewfinder as usual, so not reading it terribly well, but I'm sure you're getting the gist. I'll leave a link to this below. I made such estimates in the early 1960s, and so informed NASA engineers who were planning the Apollo flights. These estimates are still reliable. The recent Fox TV show which I saw is an ingenious and entertaining assemblage of nonsense. The claim that radiation exposure during the Apollo missions would have been fatal to the astronauts is only one example of such nonsense. James Van Allen. James A. Van Allen. Okay, so Van Allen himself says his belts aren't a problem. What else can we find here? Okay, so this is a NASA thing. They're going to say, oh, it's rigged, it's NASA. It's not in the Beano, it's not in Nexus magazine. Okay, so some people believe that the Apollo moon landings were a hoax because astronauts would have been instantly killed in the radiation belts. According to the US Occupational Safety and Health Agency, a lethal radiation dosage is 300 rads in 1 hour. What is your answer to the moon landing hoax believers? Total dosage for the trip is only 11.4 rads in 52.8 minutes. Because 52.8 minutes is equal to 0.88 hours, this is equal to a dosage of 11.4 rads divided by 0.88 hours equals 13 rads. 11.4 rads equals 13 rads in 1 hour, which is well below 300 rads in 1 hour that is considered to be lethal. Now we're getting to Jarrah White's calculation. Also, this radiation exposure would be for an astronaut outside the spacecraft, which is what Jarrah White was doing with his calculation regarding the surface area of the human body. Will be outside the spacecraft during the transit through the belts. The radiation shielding inside the spacecraft cuts down the 13 rads per hour exposure so that it is completely harmless. Okay, there we go. It's from NASA. And what else do we have here? We've got another table here, and this is the another NASA. I'll leave a link to this below, and it says average radiation doses of the flight crews for the Apollo missions. Apollo mission 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Oh, 10. That's interesting. 10's a little bit higher. Might have been some solar activity maybe, but as you can see, skin dose in rads pretty low. A little bit higher down the bottom there, 17.55, because they took and 16.51 because they spent a bit more time on the lunar surface, so they were exposed to a little bit more. But there you go. So I'll leave a link to this below as well. There's a table showing the radiation doses received by the Apollo crews. Mercifully, I think we can kick Mr. White's I don't know quite what you'd call it, into touch. And just as an indicator as how much credibility we should give Mr. White, take a look at the next clip. Actually, before we have a look at the manic Mr. White telling everyone that he's just travelled to work on a train on the luggage rack, let's just have a very quick look at this. Now, this is a NASA thing, and this is showing the Apollo. This is showing the trajectory, the Apollo trajectory through the Van Allen radiation belts. And up here we've got, there's the colour-coded values, so we know what levels of radiation there are in the different coloured zones. And the black line here, that is the trajectory of the Apollo spacecraft. So they're just, so this would be this line here will be the equator, presumably, and the Apollo spacecraft would have gone up along the edge there of the Van Allen radiation belts. So that's just a sort of graphical representation showing you the trajectory of the Apollo spacecraft. You know, it sort of doesn't come out here and then orbit around, as I think Professor Van Allen was saying. You know, if you orbit here 1,000 miles above the Earth, well, they're looking at the size of the Earth. This is probably a bit more than 1,000 miles out. There's another intense bit here. This could be 1,000 miles possibly. But so if you're orbiting in a space shuttle 1,000 miles up, you'd be in this zone here probably, and that would not be too good. Of course, the space shuttle didn't really operate that high at those sort of altitudes. It was sort of around 250 miles, I think, typically. And I don't think it used an equatorial orbit too often. I think the space stations and all that sort of stuff have inclined orbits. The only things really that are in equatorial orbits are the geostationary satellites, which are 23,000 miles out. The other thing to consider too, of course, is that loads of satellites orbiting the Earth. You know, you've got the television satellites out at 23,000 miles, you've got the GPS satellites at 18,000 miles, and you've got other satellites. I can't actually remember where the Iridium satellites are. They're probably a little bit lower, because you can use telephones to sort of access them directly, can't you? But there's lots of satellites, you know, in this region. And they last for years. They're not getting fried, are they? So there you go. Okay, well let's have a look at Mr. White explaining his trip to work to a TV reporter. Well, here's Ben's latest technical guy, Jarrell White. This is from the Jarrell White channel. And this is Mr. White being interviewed on SBS television here in Australia about overcrowding on trains.
Buses are just so full of little people. I had to ride in the bloody buggy.
Is it just me, or does he appear to have a crazed expression?
In the luggage rack things on the way over here.
He just had to travel in the luggage rack things on the way over here. Yeah, right, okay. Let's just hear that again. I wonder if that's up in, like the aircraft, you know, up above the seats, you know, with the doors on. I'm completely sane. I've seen lots of psychiatrists that have signed letters to that effect.
In the luggage rack things on the way over here.
But a new report by the Australian...
In the luggage rack things on the way over here. Well, people, I had to ride in the bloody buggy, in the luggage rack things on the way over here.
But a new...
Yes, well, what sort of man is Jarrell White, we have to wonder. Well, jarrah is a type of tree, and it's very dense wood. People make furniture out of it, and planks, of course. So what sort of man is Jarrell White? Well, the impression I get is that he's a plank. But still, there we go. You can make your own mind up when you look at his information and look at the quote from Professor Van Allen. Next clip. And now we have another of their highly trained experts, Scott Henderson, who's going to give us his opinion on the Apollo 15 landing site.
Right where the astronauts were on Apollo 15, they're claiming that it is 1,200 feet deep. Okay? And you can see the scale across the bottom there. It's just about a mile across, just a little under a mile across there.
Yeah, a lot of this is okay. It says typically ranges in depth between 600 and 900 feet. Well, there's approximately 1,200 feet at the Apollo 15 landing site. There's no source for this, of course, but yeah, okay. Well, let's see where he's going with this. I think he's saying it's too small, and he'd expect to see the lunar rover.
Is what you're looking at. So there's the CN Tower in Toronto. It's 1,150 feet to the restaurant.
He sounds like he's losing the will to live as well, doesn't he? I mean, what's the matter with this bunch today?
Empire State Building's 1,200 feet to the roof right there. Not to the turret, to the roof. 12.
I think they're getting so bored with saying the same thing over and over and over again and getting crushed over and over and over again that they're losing the will. They're losing the will to fight. That's what it is. About bloody time, I reckon.
100 feet deep. So those are the images that you can see that you're looking at. And
can we get to the point?
There's a shot. There's actually where they're standing. This sec.
Oh, they're in Canada.
Run back through this way. Come up.
Maybe just create a different window for that.
You know, I'm glad they didn't invite me on there. I think I'd have been asleep. I've been in a coma. Probably an hour and 20 minutes ago.
Oh, sure. There we go.
Yeah, but there's the actual thing. That's a
using the correct technical terminology, of course. There is the thing. Which thing is that, Scott? Which thing are you talking about?
a mile across there and 1,200 feet deep. You can see that quite clearly.
Well, what you got to bear in mind is that you know, this is a three-dimensional image. It's not a two-dimensional image. I mean, how far is that away? How far is this? How far is this away? Mile is 5,280 feet across. You see, the thing is, when it comes to, you notice this a lot with radio masts. If you've got a thin radio mast and it's 300 feet tall, it looks an awful lot taller than a guide radio mast. It looks an awful lot taller than a 300-foot self-supporting tower because the tower is wider. You know, so you're comparing something wide and V-shaped with something tall and thin in his representation here. So yeah, I don't think you can draw anything from this. I mean, if this is the actual bottom here, the bottom is snaking around. I mean, how far away is this for a start? If this is 5,000 feet across, that's supposed to be 1,200 feet deep. I mean, that's for the distance from there. If you were to draw a line across the top there and draw a line from the bottom to the top, it's going to be about a fifth, isn't it? It's going to be about a fifth of the distance across it. So if it's 5,200 odd feet across and it's 1,200 feet deep, that actual aspect ratio is about right, I would say. And if that's a real Apollo image, then of course it's right. because they stood on the moon and took it. Okay, let's. What else is it? One of the pearls of wisdom does the chef have for us?
It's just a complete error in simulation.
You're right. A complete error in simulation. Yeah. If it was simulated, you really think they'd be that daft, do you, Mr. Henderson?
And right there, if you look, looking back at this map here, off the edge, right off that corner, is the lem should be.
Okay, so what he's saying is that the lunar module should be here. You can see the rim here. And he's saying that they're on the elbow here. This is this corner here. There. And you should be able to see the lunar module there, according to Scott Henderson. And I'll show you why. I think it's reasonable to say that he's got absolutely zero photographic and analytical ability.
He's sitting straight there. And I've been looking for it everywhere. I even have an elevation map to show that it's not there. And
he's got an elevation map to show it's not there. Well, that'd be interesting. Let's see that. He's got a map with an X on it, with "not here" written on it, and an arrow pointing at the X. I know he's Canadian, but he seems to be struggling with English as well. Okay. Well, as usual with anything Scott Henderson has to say, this is absolute bloody rubbish. And I'll show you why. If we look at this is the this is Apollo 15 at Hadley Rille. Okay, so here's the lunar module. This is the thing here. This is the depression here that he's talking about. There's the lunar module. And he's saying that they're down at the elbow. They're down at the elbow here. And he can't see the lunar module. Well, that's because if we actually look at the scale, this is, see, they I don't know whether they deliberately, miss this sort of information out just to create a bit of intrigue, or whether they really are as dumb as a box of hammers. It's probably the latter, to be honest. But okay, so if we say that's 2 kilometres, 2 kilometres, there he goes, 2 kilometres. A bit more. Okay, so that's 2 kilometres. Now I need an extra hand to be able to move the image down. But from the elbow, okay, there's 2 kilometres. 2 kilometres to just before EVA 1. And another 2 kilometres to there. So they're the best part of 4 kilometres. They're the best part of 4 kilometres away from the lunar module at the elbow down there. Say to be generous, let's say between 3 and 4. Between 3 and 4 kilometres away from the lunar module. This is undulating terrain. The edge of the Rille is actually elevated a little bit. So, if he's looking across from here, he could be looking across the top of the elevated part of the edge of the Rille. Regardless, this terrain is undulating, and the lunar module is the best part of 4 kilometres away. So he's not going to be able to see it. He's saying the lunar module should be here in his ridiculous picture. It's here. Why can't I see it? Why can't I see the lunar module? It should be here. I've got a map showing me it's not there. Yes, well, I've got a map showing me why it's up here. So again, Scott Henderson completely wrong, talking absolute bloody rubbish, just like he's with Wet Flag. and his fender extensions on the lunar rover, and Buzz Aldrin's watch. Anything Scott Henderson has to say is absolute bloody drivel. Put a line through Scott Henderson. Don't waste your time. Okay, let's just move on. And now we're going to Marcus Allen, who's going to tell us about anti-gravity drive.
He was shooting crows. Give me.
Actually, hang on a sec. That's not Marcus Allen. That's Inspector Dreyfus from the Pink Panther, with his nervous twitch. Let's go to Marcus Allen. Yeah, sorry, I'm sure you'll see what I mean here fairly rapidly. But this. If you're still thinking of giving Marcus Allen any credibility, just listen to what he's got to say here. These guys are, they're getting slower and slower and slower as they're getting towards the end. Captain Souffle looking decidedly cheesed off. Ben, just the same, they can't wait for this to end. Look at it. Put us out of our misery, Mr. Mumbling, please. And there's Neil Peel, or Neil Geddes Ward, depending on which way the wind's blowing at the time. I noticed that he's got what looks like a picture of the two World Trade Tower 1 and 2 before they were destroyed on his T-shirt. So I'm guessing that underneath that we never see more than this much of Mr. Peel. But I'm guessing that under the image on his T-shirt it says something like "Morons for 9/11 Truth." Okay, well let's just go to the bit I wanted to show you.
What do you guys think that we will ever get to the moon?
That's another guy. That's a guy called Andy. Do you think we'll ever get to the moon? Now, of course, we've got to the moon. It's a historical fact. 6 people have walked on the moon. Even the remains of someone is on the moon. The remains of Eugene Shoemaker are on the moon. But do you think we'll ever get to the moon? Just prior to this, Marcus was talking about his cameras and his lighting and all that sort of stuff. But I think maybe I'll have a look at that in another video. They were talking about the spacesuits as well. I think I'll probably look at that in another video as well. So there might be a part 3 to this. I think it's worthwhile showing the lighting on the Changi 3 spacecraft and compare it with the lighting on the Apollo 11 spacecraft. Anything Marcus Allen has to say, of course, is absolute rubbish. You can put a line through it. So it's just a bit of fun, really. But be very easy to put the images side by side and say, well, was there a Chinaman out of shot illuminating this? You'll probably say, yeah, there was. I've read about it in Nexus. Okay, well let's get back to Inspector Dreyfus here, and I'm sure you'll see what I mean pretty rapidly.
If there's ever a possibility of doing it.
Yes. I think
Nervous twitch in the left eye.
Go ahead, Marcus.
No, I'd say that there is a possibility once we've overcome the radiation problem, which could be solved.
Yes, now this is the opinion of a failed photographer and car salesman, remember? What was it Ben said? A rank amateur. Yes. Pearls of wisdom from a rank amateur.
I think the new technology is coming close to it, but also with a different propulsion system. These chemical rockets, no matter how powerful they appear to be, are extremely dangerous things.
Pearls of wisdom indeed. Chemical rockets are very dangerous things. Where's my pencil? Better make a note of that one.
They don't always work as well as we're told they do. If we can unscramble some of the secret facilities where
Unscramble the secret facilities. So you go to a secret facility and unscramble it. I wonder what exactly that means. How would you unscramble a facility? Would that involve a wrecking ball? A bulldozer, possibly? Unscramble a secret facility.
The anti-gravity drives. Are being developed where the 0-point energy work is being done.
That Twitch is getting worse, isn't it? Yes, of course, he's just spruiking this bloody rubbish because it creates a bit of intrigue. It's the sort of rubbish you'd read about in the magazine he peddles. He peddles Nexus magazine, of course. Which will tell you that free energy is real. Absolute drivel. And it will probably tell you that he's probably hinting here that we've got some recovered alien spacecraft and we're trying to reverse engineer the anti-gravity drive. Yes, of course. Any kind of gravity drive, anti-gravity drive will be completely useless for interstellar travel. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Put a line through Marcus Allen. Everything he says is absolute rubbish.
We may be able to get to the moon much more easily and get back again. Don't forget, we need to come back as well.
That's I know that Andrew Johnson, who often speaks at the Holly Wickham Paranormal Group, he
said that. I might do a video on Andrew Johnson. He's a bit of a laugh as well.
He said an awful lot about this, and it's absolutely true. And with such craft, we essentially be set free because these things don't need to carry all that fuel around, which you were talking about earlier, on this big rocket. But Marcus, thanks very much.
Yes, I wonder why Ben wasn't telling them all. You know, when Bart Sabrill was saying, you know, it's all impossible and all this sort of stuff. Why Ben wasn't saying, well, there's bases. Why didn't he say there's bases on the moon, Bart? There's bases on Mars. They're part of the secret space program. I know all about it. I'm beginning to sound like he's Neil voice from The Guardian. There's bases on the moon, man.
And you know, I hope to be talking to you again soon because Marcus and I are going to be working on our own project in the run-up to July.
Oh, that should be a laugh.
It's,
in the run-up to July, I'd looking at Mr. Allen, I'd make it in March, sometime in March if I were you, Ben. Okay, well I think that's enough of this codswallop. I might do a part 3, as I said a few minutes ago, and we'll look at the spacesuits and we'll look at the images and the cameras. Marcus Allen was talking about filming spy satellites, but there's bound to be an answer for it all, of course, because it's all real, it's all historical fact. So there will be information available with regards how they protected the film if it needed protecting in the cameras. I wouldn't doubt that for a minute, and certainly the spacesuits are going to be real. So whatever they're saying about the spacesuits, they're either images of not the real spacesuits, or whatever training spacesuits perhaps that didn't quite have to meet the spec. But I haven't looked at it yet. But I'll take a look at that and maybe do a part 3 about the spacesuits and about the cameras and what have you. And if I need tips on raising my souffle, I'll flick this guy an email. Okay, well, as always, if you've struggled through this video as far as this point, many thanks for your perseverance. Hope you found some information useful and got a bit of a giggle out of it, and perhaps I'll catch you again.